He was just 18, but somehow he seduced me on the ranch. I never thought it would happen somewhere like that. I mean, when you imagine falling for someone, you picture candlelit dinners, maybe a late-night city walk, not miles of open land and the smell of horses in the air. But that's exactly where it all started, on the ranch, the kind of place where you hear the wind before you hear people, and where silence holds more weight than words. I wasn't looking for anything. I had gone there to disconnect, to be alone, to clear my head after a string of decisions that left me numb and tired of myself. I wasn't expecting him, the 18-year-old with sunburned shoulders, rough hands, and eyes that watched me like he already knew my secrets. At first, I told myself it was just admiration, that his energy reminded me of something I'd lost along the way. But as the days passed and we started sharing quiet glances, early mornings, and laughter that came too easily, something in me shifted. He wasn't just a kid. He had a presence that pulled me in, slowly and quietly, like dusk creeping across the fields. And then one night, something happened, something I hadn't prepared for. But before we get there, I need to tell you everything, every moment, every doubt, every stolen glance that built the storm inside me. Because sometimes, the most unexpected people walk into your life at the most unexpected places, and they leave you forever changed. If you've ever questioned your heart, if you've ever felt a connection that defied logic, if you've ever wanted something that scared you, then this story might just feel like yours. Stay with me until the end, because what started with silence on a ranch ended with a truth I never imagined I'd speak out loud. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. What happened between us will challenge everything you think you know about love, timing, and the courage it takes to surrender. The first morning I saw him, I was standing by the fence with a cup of black coffee, staring at the horizon like I was in some indie movie about loneliness. The air was cold, the sky was a dull gray, and I was already wondering if this whole escape to the ranch thing had been a mistake. Then, there he was, walking out of the barn, shirt half sticking to his back with sweat, jeans dusty at the knees, boots heavy against the dirt. His hair was messy, sticking up in all directions like he hadn't even looked in a mirror. But it was his face that stopped me. His eyes, sharp, curious, with that reckless brightness that only comes at 18, when the world still feels like something you can bend to your will. I froze mid-sip. He noticed me. Of course he did. With a lazy kind of confidence, he tilted his head like he was sizing me up. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile curled at the corner of his mouth. I swear it lasted less than a second, but it felt like the air thickened around me. I turned away too fast, pretending to check my phone for a signal that didn't exist out here. For the rest of that morning, I caught myself watching him from the porch. He worked with the horses, strong and sure-footed. When he laughed with one of the older ranch hands, I noticed how his smile lit up his whole face. He looked so alive, so free, like someone who hadn't been told to tone himself down yet. I hated how easily my thoughts drifted back to him again and again. At lunchtime, I sat alone at the edge of the field, biting into a stale sandwich, when I heard footsteps crunching the grass behind me. "City guy, right?" he said. I looked up. He stood there, wiping sweat off his forehead with the hem of his t-shirt, revealing just a little too much skin for my peace of mind. His chest wasn't big, but it was defined in a way that made me blink too long before answering. "Yeah," I managed. My voice sounded smaller than I liked. He sat down next to me without asking. Too close. "I'm Luca," he said, picking up a twig and fiddling with it like we had known each other for years. I nodded. "Chris," he smirked. "Figured." "Figured?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Don't know. You just look like a Chris." I laughed. A real one. The kind I hadn't let out in weeks. His grin widened like he was proud of himself for making me do that. For the next few minutes we talked. Nothing deep. Mostly about how bored he was here and how city people always looked lost on ranches. I asked how long he'd been working there. He said, "Long enough to know where all the snakes hide." The way he said it made me shiver. And not because of snakes. When he stood up to leave, he stretched, giving me a full, careless view of his lower back just above the waistband of his jeans. I forced myself to look away. "You should come help in the stables later," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Not sure I'd be much help." His smile turned sly. "Doesn't mean I don't want you there." And with that, he walked away. I sat there for a long time after, heart racing for reasons I didn't want to admit. I told myself it was harmless. Just a kid being friendly, a kid who liked teasing city guys out of their comfort zones. But deep down, a voice I hadn't heard in years whispered something else. "You're already in trouble, Chris." And by the time the sun began to dip below the trees, I knew I'd be heading to that stable, even if every part of me screamed that I shouldn't. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to convince myself not to go. I paced back and forth in the small guest cabin where I was staying, staring out the window like I could change my mind just by sheer willpower. The truth was, I already knew I was going. I'd been waiting for an excuse to wander toward the stables ever since Luca left me sitting there with my heart in my throat. When I finally walked down the dirt path, the sun had started to sink low, casting everything in gold. The air smelled like hay and earth, and somewhere in the distance I could hear horses moving, their hooves shifting on the ground like they sensed something too. I found him brushing down one of the horses, sleeves rolled up, a streak of dirt across his cheek like some scene out of a daydream I didn't know I'd been having. "There he is," he said without looking up. His tone was light, teasing, like this had been some game he already knew he was winning. I leaned against the wooden frame of the barn door. "I told you I wouldn't be much help." "That's okay," he replied, flashing me that same crooked smile. "You can just watch." And God, did I? Every move he made was casual but deliberate. The way his muscles shifted as he worked, the way he leaned in close to the horse, whispering something low that made the animal settle. Even the way he caught my eyes now and then, holding my gaze just a second too long before turning away. "So, what brings you out here?" he asked after a while, tossing the brush aside and walking toward me, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Needed a break from the city." He cocked an eyebrow. "Running from something? Or someone?" I laughed nervously. "Maybe both." For a second he just studied me, like he could see through every layer I was trying to keep on. The air between us shifted, turned heavier, closer. "You're not like most guys who come here," he said. "How so?" "Most of them. They stay distant, act like this place is beneath them. But you've been watching everything, like you're trying to memorize it." I swallowed hard. Maybe I am. There it was again, that smile. Like he knew exactly how much power he had over the way my chest tightened every time he got closer. Before I could say anything else, he grabbed a bale of hay and dragged it toward the open side of the barn. "Come sit," he said. And I did. Sitting shoulder to shoulder with him, close enough to feel the heat from his skin. The sun had dipped lower now, painting streaks of pink and orange across the sky, making everything around us feel suspended, like we were sitting outside of time itself. We talked about stupid things, movies he liked, how boring he found school, how much he wanted to leave the ranch one day and see more of the world. I told him about my job in the city, about how lonely it got even when I was surrounded by people. Somewhere between those small confessions, he leaned his head back and closed his eyes, like he was soaking it all in. "You ever think about doing something just because you wanted to?" he asked, voice softer now. "Sometimes." He opened his eyes and turned to me, locking me in place with that stare. "Good," he said. "You should." The silence that followed felt different, heavy, charged. And then, without warning, he nudged his shoulder against mine, playful but lingering just long enough to make my breath catch. I laughed, trying to brush it off. "You're trouble, you know that?" His smile widened. "Maybe." For a second, neither of us moved. The space between us felt razor thin. My heart pounded so loudly I wondered if he could hear it. And then, just as I considered leaning in, the sound of a loud engine echoed down the dirt road. Headlights swung across the barn walls. Someone had arrived. Luca stood up quickly, dusting off his jeans like nothing had happened. "That's my uncle. He hates when I hang around here this late." He turned to leave, throwing one last glance over his shoulder. "See you tomorrow, Chris." And just like that, he was gone. I sat there for a long time after, staring at the empty space beside me, wondering what would have happened if no one had interrupted us. The next day felt like torture. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that I'd read too much into our conversation in the barn. Maybe that nudge against my shoulder had been nothing more than friendly teasing. Maybe he acted that way with everyone. But deep down, I knew better. There had been something there. Something unspoken, but real. By noon, I'd checked my phone for notifications more times than I cared to admit, even though there was barely any signal out here. I wandered aimlessly around the ranch, pretending to admire the scenery, but really, I was looking for him. It wasn't until late afternoon that I found him again. He was near the back field, fixing a loose fence post, his shirt tied around his waist, exposing his bare back. The sun kissed every inch of his skin, highlighting the curve of his shoulders and the dip of his spine. I froze for a second, debating whether to approach. Before I could decide, he turned around and caught me watching. A slow grin spread across his face. "You lost again, city boy?" I smiled back, feeling heat crawl up my neck. "Just getting some fresh air." "Sure you are," he said, tossing the hammer onto the ground and wiping sweat from his brow. "You want to help or just stand there making me nervous?" "Nervous?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He shrugged. "Can't concentrate with you staring like that." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words got stuck somewhere between my throat and my pride. So instead, I walked over and picked up one of the fence nails from the dirt, pretending I had any idea what to do. He laughed softly. "You're holding that like it's gonna bite you." "Give me a break," I said, shaking my head. Without warning, he stepped behind me, close enough that I felt the heat from his body against my back. His hand came around mine, guiding the nail and my fingers into the right position. "Like this," he said lowly, his breath brushing against the side of my neck. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. His palm stayed over mine a second longer than necessary. When I glanced sideways, I caught him looking at me, not smiling this time, not teasing, just watching me. Like he was waiting for me to do something, say something, anything. I swallowed hard, every nerve in my body burning from how close he was. Before I could speak, a loud crack of thunder rolled over the hills. We both looked up at the sky. The sun had vanished behind heavy clouds, and the wind had picked up almost out of nowhere. "Storm's coming," Luca said, pulling away reluctantly. "We should head back." I followed him toward the main house, my heart still racing, the memory of his touch lingering like static on my skin. The rain started falling just as we reached the porch, fat, heavy drops soaking us in seconds. We stood there, laughing like two kids caught in a summer storm. "You look like a drowned rat," he teased, pushing wet hair from his forehead. "Speak for yourself," I shot back, flicking water toward him. For a second, the air shifted again. That same charged pause like yesterday in the barn. He opened his mouth like he was about to say something, but then the front door swung open. It was his uncle, a broad, heavy-set man with a permanent scowl etched on his face. "Luca, get inside, now." The warmth between us evaporated instantly. Luca's playful expression faded. "Yeah, coming." Without another word, he stepped inside, leaving me alone on the porch with the rain falling harder around me. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the closed door. This time, it wasn't just the weather making it hard to breathe. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every second of the day in my mind. The way Luca stood behind me, his breath on my neck, the weight of his hand over mine, that half second where our eyes locked and said more than either of us dared to speak out loud. And then, his uncle's voice, loud, cold, final. I couldn't ignore the way Luca's whole body language changed the second the older man appeared. The easy smile vanished. His posture stiffened. There was fear there. Or maybe shame. I wasn't sure which. Just past midnight, the storm still raging outside, I stepped onto the porch with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. Lightning flickered across the field, and in that brief burst of light, I saw him. Luca. He was out by the barn, sitting alone on the edge of the wooden platform, his head down, hair soaked from the rain that hadn't fully stopped. I didn't even hesitate. I pulled my jacket over my head and sprinted toward him, my bare feet sinking into the wet grass. By the time I reached him, I was drenched. "Are you crazy?" I said, breathless. He didn't look at me at first, just kept staring at the ground, fingers tracing lines in the mud near his boots. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered. I sat down next to him, the cold from the wet wood seeping through my jeans. Me neither. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were distant thunder and the slow dripping of rainwater from the barn roof. Then he let out a long, shaky breath. "You know, my uncle doesn't like me spending time with guests." I stayed quiet, unsure where this was going. "He thinks people like you." He paused, laughing bitterly. "He thinks you'll turn me into something I'm not." My stomach twisted. "And what does that mean?" "You know what it means," he said, finally turning toward me. Our eyes met, and for the first time he wasn't smiling. His gaze was raw, like he'd dropped every wall he'd spent years building. "I'm not stupid, Chris," he continued. "I know what I'm feeling. I know what's been happening between us." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. He stood up suddenly, pacing like he had too much energy to sit still. "It's like, every time I'm near you, I feel like I'm gonna lose control. And I hate it. I hate that I want this. Luca." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You don't get it. You'll leave in a few days. Go back to your city, your life. And I'll still be here, stuck with him breathing down my neck, pretending to be someone I'm not." The weight of his words hit me hard. I stood too, stepping closer. "I didn't come here looking for this, Luca. But I can't pretend I don't feel it too." For a second, I thought he'd back away, but he didn't. We stood inches apart, our breathing uneven, the air thick with everything unsaid. Then, the barn door swung open behind us. His uncle stood there, holding a flashlight, his face thunderous with anger. "Luca!" he shouted, voice slicing through the night. "Inside, now!" Luca flinched like he'd been struck. Without looking at me, he turned and walked toward the house. I stood there, heart pounding, watching him disappear into the dark. The rain started falling again, harder this time, and I was left standing alone in the storm, wondering how much longer either of us could keep running from this. The next day felt like walking on broken glass. I didn't see Luca at breakfast. I didn't see him at the stables. Not by the fields. Not anywhere. Every time I passed his uncle, the man barely looked at me. When he did, it was with a glare sharp enough to slice through steel. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my jacket and headed straight to the back of the property, toward the big oak tree by the far fence. It was where I'd seen Luca sit sometimes when he wanted to be alone. Sure enough, he was there. Legs pulled to his chest, arms wrapped tight around them like he was holding himself together. "Luca," I said softly, coming to a stop a few feet away. He didn't look up. I stood there, hesitating for a second before I sat down right beside him, close enough that our arms brushed. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said quietly. That made him lift his head. "Already?" His voice cracked on the word. I nodded. "Your uncle made it clear I'm not welcome here." Silence, long and heavy. And then, without warning, he reached out and grabbed my wrist. "Don't go," he whispered. I stared at him, heart pounding, breath shallow. "Luca." Before I could say anything else, he leaned in and kissed me. Soft, quick, trembling, but real. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine for a reaction, for permission, for something. And before I could think, I kissed him back. Longer this time. Deeper. Both of us holding on like we were afraid the world would end before we let go. And maybe, for us, it already had. The night before I was supposed to leave, I lay awake in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of the guest cabin. My lips still tingled from the kiss we'd shared under the oak tree. I kept replaying the way he'd held my face, the desperation in his touch, the way his fingers trembled against my skin like he was terrified and relieved all at once. Sleep never came. Just before dawn, I found myself walking back toward the barn. The air was cool, the ground still damp from the storm 2 nights earlier. The ranch was silent, everyone else still asleep, or so I thought. When I rounded the corner, there he was. Luca sat on the hay bales inside the barn, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor like he'd been sitting there for hours. His hair was messy, and he wore the same worn-out hoodie I'd seen him wear a dozen times, but something about him felt heavier, tired. I stood in the doorway for a second, unsure if I should disturb him, but then he lifted his head and saw me. For a long moment we just looked at each other. No words, no fake smiles. Then he stood up, walked toward me, and without hesitation, wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't a passionate kiss this time. It wasn't teasing or playful. It was something softer, but stronger, like he needed to memorize the way I felt, like he needed something to hold on to after I was gone. "I don't want this to end," he whispered against my neck. I swallowed hard. "I don't either." He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. "Then don't go." My heart twisted. "Luca, you know I can't stay. Not like this. Your uncle. This place. It's not safe for you. Not while things are like this." His jaw tensed, and for a second I thought he might yell, but instead he just let out a frustrated sigh and buried his face against my shoulder. "I hate this," he mumbled. "I hate that I finally feel something, and it's with someone who's leaving." I tightened my arms around him. "You're stronger than you think. You're braver than you know." He pulled back again, looking at me with a fierce, almost broken intensity. "Will you come back?" he asked. "I swear," I said, placing my hand against his cheek. "As soon as I can. Promise me." "I promise." For a few minutes more, we just stood there, holding each other like the world outside that barn didn't exist. When I finally walked away, my chest felt like it might collapse. I didn't look back until I reached the truck that would take me back to the city. And when I did, there he was, standing at the edge of the porch, watching me leave, his hands stuffed in his hoodie pockets, his eyes shining. But this time, he didn't look away. And neither did I. As the truck rolled down the dirt road, I closed my eyes and whispered to myself the one truth I knew for sure now. Some connections don't end with distance. They don't break with time. They wait. And when the right moment comes, they find their way back.